too, but then I'll have something that's a little more stable until I could break in or whatever. But usually what would happen, I would say I'd work for different, say I worked for MTV or whatever, but usually what would get me opportunities was not that. It was like I would meet people in museums or at a performance, or it wasn't really through there was the stability of being in the TV business behind the scenes. But so there's skills I took when I was a manager, when we met, like there's skills that I took from that and a living, but it wasn't as far as with the poetry, it was something separate, but in a way that was good. It felt pure in a way,
How did your first book come about, The Gallery of Light?
So being in Manhattan, first I was in a new Walk on Water. A couple of the guys left the band, and there was a guy who's now Clayton, with Cell Dweller. He's pretty known with his video games and his movie music, and he's in a band Cell Dweller now. But he was in a band. He was a heavy metal guy that we shared inspiration and industrial music and different things like that. And he became in a new Walk on Water. But it really ended up being an experiment because he wanted to go. He got signed to a record deal. And at the time, we thought it was the first Christian record deal for industrial music, because Christian music wasn't really accepting like heavy metal and other, no less something as innovative as industrial music. But really, I don't think music should have, I think you feel the same way, shouldn't have classifications. It's all just music, I felt to go in the direction, to take the sacred art into like sacred pop art. So instead of being segmented in on a Christian label, I felt it would be... it was innovative. It was going to be more huge. It was like we struck on something. But he went off and had an amazing career, and I'm glad we shared the inspiration. But in that time, in Manhattan, I was doing a lot of readings in Manhattan, Kenny's Castaways and all these different, and I was at the New York and different places, and I met people that did book publishing. And so it gave me an opportunity. I had all these poems, so I was like, well, maybe I'll do it on the written page. And what happened, it kind of like, it was exciting because it really filled. That's how my first CD, The Orchard, was in the city. I guess I'm jumping ahead, but it was just like kind of like just being there, and having a gift. Some doors opened for me, so I went from a chapbook now to a full book. And what happened, the biggest distributor, Ingram, distributed it. So this is before with the internet. It was 94. So maybe the internet was starting up, and I was there on early on the internet. But the book then would be in all the different bookstores. The B. Daltons were like the same company as Barnes & Noble, then Walden Books. They were actually in the shopping malls at that point. And it's before then Borders started after that. But what would happen, I would go in and I would do a book signing, and I would do performance art, which to me, that was always a part of it. For example, some people didn't even know my name, but they knew, oh, you're the fetal position poet, because I would get in the fetal position, like on the cover of the book, of being emotionally paralyzed. But then as the person traveled, originally the Gallery of Light, when I performed it on the Joe Franklin show, it was a 15-minute poem, but I did it for 3 minutes on Joe Franklin. But it evolved into this 40-minute piece. Wow. But basically there was this thing that like, emotionally paralyzed in the fetal position, and then it became, spiritually born, and one was in the strobe light section, one was in the candlelight section leading to sunlight. It was like this person, we're the work of arts, may your very soul be a great poem, or life is a message, this person was traveling through 7 different lights, and it was like a self-help. It was a rock opera, but it was like a spoken word rock opera, and usually the rock opera is like The Wall, Quadrophenia, Tommy, or about someone falling apart, or Nine Inch Nails, a Downward Spiral, concept albums, people falling apart due to role models and lovers and this kind of things, teachers, parents. But this was like almost like a self-help thing. So what happened is I had an opportunity to put this book out. Then the distributor. So sometimes the more people in it, more people that are in the pie. But it was also, it got out there more. So as I traveled or locally, like say the first one I did was at the Smith Haven Mall. Because I went to different malls.
Smith Haven.
I could do, they'd be like, you're the first poet I met, and then they got to experience poetry, and it just so happened at the same time, the spoken word movement exploded then at the New York Poets Cafe, and with Bob Holman, who was a close friend of mine, Mark Pellington, who was a big film director, he would come to a few of my, he came to my Kenny's Castaways reading, and he wanted to do a video of my String of Pearls, and he did the Buzz show on MTV. Well, eventually he did the Jeremy video with Pearl Jam, and he eventually did movies. He was like, you should stick with Bob Holman. This is going places. This is exploding with the poetry. But I had my own vision, and it was like, so I felt like hip hop was poetry, but it wasn't me. But I loved it. But I was like, the spoken word, I felt the same way. I would go into the New York and I would get so much respect and love. And I even toured with a lot of those poets. I really should have been. They asked me to be in the photo on the New York Poets book in '94, and in it, and I wasn't. And really, that's one of the defining moments of the '90s or poetry, of modern poetry. It was really like a big moment for poetry. But I had these really, I had a lot of vision, of like what I wanted to do, So some of that's great, but some of that pushed away opportunities as well. Being like a purist. McDonald's wanted me to read for a commercial. I didn't want to do that. It kind of gave them the finger. So there was an integrity. So things could work on different levels. For example, maybe I would do it. I don't do the, I read for an MTV VJ, and they were interested maybe in a second interview or whatever, and I didn't want to do it or do the commercial. But maybe I would do a charity gig, and there'd be less people there, but maybe there would have been more people if I would have done those different things. Or maybe it doesn't, if I didn't agree with something as whatever, certain, the health of McDonald's food or whatever, it doesn't mean, so it could be a good choice, but it could also, like, sometimes things could work on several levels. Like, for example, at that point, I was even like Moby, for example, he made it kind of through commercials, but the commercials were better than the music videos at that time. But in my mind, it was like cringeworthy, and probably McDonald's was a good decision, but there were similar things like that where people were like, that's crazy, you should never push those opportunities away. But really, I was after something like a juice, like in essence in the poetry, and I was trying to, with that vision, sometimes it was like healthy boundaries, like in a way, like if I didn't have that boundary, I might not accomplish some higher things, but the higher things might not have been, as marketable or something, or valued as much. But really, think about what Mother Teresa said. So we're talking about before about imagination, with knowledge and wisdom, and you can innovate. But like with love, Mother Teresa said, some of the greatest things people do is ordinary things, but with great love. So a lot of it is perspective and growing. And but I was certainly going, and I was there, and was a catalyst in like an exciting time of creation.
Did this?
It still is. It still is.
Now at MTV, you were doing behind the scenes stuff, or was your poetry featured on MTV?
So I did behind the scenes technical work, but then Kennedy, I had met her one time. Now she's on Fox News in the elevator, and I gave her the Gallery of Light book. And then at the beach house, they used to have like the summer beach house in the Hamptons that people would perform.
Oh yeah.
He interviewed me, and I got to do a little hold up my book and recite my poem, Microwave Romance. So it was on the Most Wanted show. So it just so happened I did it before I was on the road with Lollapalooza. So it was like, that helped me with a lot of sales, and it was also exciting because at that point it was a big part of pop culture, MTV, Yeah. And it was like, so it was like a very exciting thing. I remember being very tired because I was negotiating, taking a leave of absence from MTV, and then I was, the same days I was doing News 12, and then boom, I was flying, and bang, I was right at the Lollapalooza tour, and the first date was in Las Vegas. This was '94.
How did you get
But
that?
the guy liked me. That was the sound guy, Sean London. I was touring with the Poetry Tent, but he liked the poem that I did. I didn't recite much, Theater of Roses. And the next year, he was in charge of a stage, the Lab. So I was the only poet that he asked back to be a part of the stage. So in '95, I got to do a bunch of, I did like Northeast, maybe 4 dates or something like that. Whatever I can get to, you know? And where it was more like a month before that. But it was kind of, that period was like exciting, but also like a blur, you know? And I'm a giving person, so a lot of my energy went to other people. And, you know, I was younger, you know, where, you know, there's, you know, I don't know, each period I have such great memories of it, and I'm excited about the future as well. And I take that experience with me, you know? But it was great seeing a lot of the country. It was the first time I saw a lot of the country, you know.
During Lollapalooza?
Yeah. You know, I traveled, you know, most of the country. And I had done some traveling on a missionary trip to the Ukraine. And then, like, internationally, like, London, Paris, you know, Quebec, you know, like I did, you know, Ireland. But I had never, like, there was a lot of the U.S. that was beautiful that I've never, you know, I got to see the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
And then, yeah, and do radio. Like, there were, like, major radio shows where I would recite. Sometimes they would write in the local paper that what a great moment, like, it stood out, you know. But they didn't know my name. Like, in Newsday, they were like, there was this moment where they tipped the microphone to the guy, and, you know, I'd be live on the radio, like Z100 LIR or whatever that it was in that state. And sometimes I would do book signings in that state. And sometimes it was just too much because you had to travel, you know. It was like, but it was a lot of experiences quick, you know. And it was wonderful experience. For example, I'm seeing these other great poets, and it was going over really well. There was a time in New York, it was raining, and people that didn't want to be in the Poetry Tent were in there. And everybody was afraid to go out, and I went out, and it was like through the roof. It went great, you know. And then Maggie Stepp came out, the late Maggie Stepp. And but most people were afraid, you know. The people in Chicago, they were tough, but more for the Chicago crowd. But they were afraid of the New York crowd. But in Chicago, actually, I didn't go over that great in Chicago. But it was interesting too how you do the same poetry, but in different states, it goes over different, you know. But it was exciting, you know. You know, even though it was a side stage, for example, there would be old guests, you know, like the main acts. The Beastie Boys might come out to the Poetry Tent, or the Smashing Pumpkins, or, you know, and George Clinton. Like, so there was like a lot of, what's that band? Not L7. Well, a lot of the bands of the time. I was hoping Nick Cave would come out on my break. I would see him every day because I think he's a great songwriter and a great poet. But the Last Poets, for example, they influenced all the hip-hop people. They did certain dates in the Midwest. I recently reconnected with them. They were at the Bowery Poetry Club, and I was at the Bowery Poetry Club in November before I had a bad car accident that I'm recovering from. In November, I had done that, then my Thanksgiving homeless dinner, and the Last Poets were playing, I think the night before I was playing, or 2 nights before, and I reconnected with them. But so it was like, wow, I got to, you know, they inspired all the early rap. You know, they would do it congas, they would recite, you know, so it was like I was giving inspiration, but I was receiving so much inspiration, you know.
Now, during any of this, did you ever feel like giving up? Did you say, I don't know if this is going to get me anywhere. Should I even bother with this?
You know, you always have those moments where you're like, you're exhausted and you're like, oh boy, there's so much more of an output of energy than an input, kind of, you know. But I don't know, it's just me. It's just what I do. Just like as a kid in a room by myself, it's just what I do. Like it's just it was more of an inward thing coming out, you know. So like the outward, you know, it was like